Hey everybody, it does say that we are live, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is a horror panel for TBRCon hosted by fanfi addict David Walters. This actual panel, we're going to be discussing the modern horror renaissance. My name is Sadie Hartmann. A lot of people call me Mother Horror on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I don't do TikTok anymore, so don't even follow me there. I am the co-owner of a horror subscription company called Nightworms. I also review horror fiction for a lot of different platforms, Cemetery Dance, Scream Magazine, Lit Reactor, Tor Nightfire, blah, blah, blah. Joining me today are a bunch of amazing, talented people that I am so honored to share this panel with. And I'm going to go ahead and just go to clockwise from the way I see you. So let's do some introductions, starting with Eric LaRocca.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here on this panel with all of you. So my name's Eric LaRocca. I am a horror dark fiction author. I wrote a novella called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke with Weird Punk Books, and also a fiction collection called The Strange Thing We Become and Other Dark Tales. And I live in Boston with my partner.
Thanks, Eric. And next to you is Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a horror poet primarily. I also write a bit of fiction and nonfiction. I'm the author of a collection of nightmares, collection of dreamscapes, and recently this year, Lee Murray, Jeanson, Angela Eureka Smith, and I came together and wrote Tortured Willows. It's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you, Christina. Also, we have Andy Davidson.
Hi, everyone. I'm the author of In the Valley of the Sun, which was published in 2017. I also wrote The Boatman's Daughter, which came out in 2020. So my third book is coming out in October of 2022, and I'm delighted to be here with some of these amazing people that I admire so much.
Thanks, Andy. Next to you is Lee Murray.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Lee Murray. I'm going to try and be coherent because it's 4 a.m. here in New Zealand. So I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm a USA Today best-selling author, a Bram Stoker winner, a Shirley Jackson winner, and yeah, I think I've written 10 books and about 18 or 19, edited 18 or 19 dark fiction and speculative fiction titles. So really excited to be here. It's wonderful to be in this room. Congratulations, Eric and Ellen and Christina, for making the, Bram Stoker preliminary round this last weekend. So it's exciting. So much great. It's just very exciting to be in this room. So thank you.
Hi.
Go ahead, Ellen. Sorry.
I'm Ellen Datlow, and I'm pleased to be here with everybody. And for me, it's not that early, thank goodness. But I do have to say, I'm a short story editor. I edit science fiction, fantasy, and horror, but mostly horror these days. And I've been editing the best horror of the year in some form or another for about 35 years, I guess, including my best horror of the year and the year's best fantasy and horror. I've edited a lot of short story anthologies. My most recent are When Things Get Dark and Body Shocks, and the best horror of the year number 13, I think, just came out. I'm working on number 14. I also edited novellas for Tor Nightfire and for Tor.com.
Thanks, Ellen. I will put a plug in there for Body Shocks and When Things Get Dark. Those are two of my favorite anthologies I've read in a really long time. Both of them are amazing.
And I'm shocked and delighted that Body Shocks is actually nominated for the Splatterpunk Award, which is so unlike anything I do or have done.
It was pretty extreme. I mean, if people are looking for extreme body horror, that was a really well-rounded selection of stories.
Thank you. It was.
Yeah. So just a little housekeeping. Your mute is all the way down at the bottom, your mute button if you need to do that. You can also stop your camera if you need to. I'm basically going to just be asking some questions that I've been kind of ruminating on concerning the horror renaissance. And we can also take questions from the audience. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. I see a lot of people over there hanging out and chatting. So if you're watching, please keep in mind that if you have a burning question pertaining to something that you hear during the discussion or something about horror, the horror renaissance, go ahead and drop it in there. And if I see it, I'll be sure to ask. So yeah, let's just jump in. I have a fun little icebreaker conversation starter. I am curious if you have had your own personal horror renaissance or if you have been a horror fan steadily your entire reading life. And I will start with Christina.
Oh, wow. I think I've been a horror fan since I was 5 or 6, since I watched Amityville Horror with my brother, and then Poltergeist, and then it never ended, really. Horror was really huge here. It was pretty much, it was on TV a lot, actually, for some reason, back in the 80s. So that was all we saw, a lot of B-grade horror movies, and I just loved them. My brother's a big fan as well. So yeah, almost every other day we'd be watching something on TV, and it would be horror. And when I started reading, it was all the horror books in the bookstores as well. And yeah, I don't think I've ever stopped. There was no, it was always a constant for me.
And where are you, Christina? You're in Singapore?
Yes, I'm in Singapore.
Yeah. So yeah, that's been a steady horror diet for you.
Yes.
I love that.
Hasn't stopped. I don't think it ever will.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been invested in horror since I was really, really young. It all kind of started with like the old classic Universal monster movies, like Creature from the Black Lagoon and Dracula, Frankenstein, that my mom introduced me to when I was like 8 or 9. And it just sort of progressed from there. And I really just became like a student of the genre and did everything I could to read as much as possible, watch as many films as possible. And, then eventually I came upon really great like queer horror works like by Clive Barker, Michael McDowell. And those pieces like really resonated with me, not really seeing queer storylines, queer characters in horror before. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think I'm, the horror renaissance it's just been like my whole life. Like I've really steadily been like a student of the genre, and I've always just been really invested in it.
Thanks, Eric. Lee, how about you? What is your horror experience?
Yeah, look, I think I think I was more of a generalist growing up. I sort of read everything, and we had probably quite a different sort of range of things to read here in New Zealand. It's sort of a little colony, and things come on a ship, and it takes a while, and we're always the last to get anything, and it's the same right now with the pandemic on. We've got no shipping, so we can't get anything, and so I think, to be honest, I read really widely as a youngster. I read lots of, British fantasy, dark fantasy, and of course I read the classics. I read Dracula and I read Frankenstein, and I read Catherine Mansfield. Some of the darker stuff. Janet Frame, some of her stuff is pretty dark. So I did read quite widely. And then I was always a scribbler, and I didn't actually start writing until when I say start writing, I sort of didn't believe I could do that until, my 40s. So I'm kind of really a late bloomer. And I got sucked into that whole write what you know thing, sort of you should write what you know because, it will be more authentic. So, so I started, I was a marathon runner in the day. So I started with this really breezy sort of little chicklet, it's completely divorced from anything horror at all. And then I realized that, actually, I want to write about the things that matter. I want to write about the things that frighten me and concern me. And that just automatically brings you to the horror. It's just, I feel like it's a grown-up thing. We grow up and we become horror writers because that's the important topics that count for us. And so now I'm kind of coming full circle, and lately my writing has sort of exploring, my heritage and sort of some of those things affecting Asian women. And so that sort of, write what you know, it's sort of coming right round full circle. So I want to say that I've always loved dark fiction and horror, and fantasy in particular, although I'm tending more away from that because I was a scientist by profession. So yeah, so I think I'm probably not like anybody else in that I wasn't one of those people reading sort of just horror from a very young age. And as far as films go, I'm a total scaredy cat when it comes to films. Something about a book that I can kind of put down and, I don't know, divorce myself from it. But when it's, I don't know, maybe it's the sound or something, but I watched the trilogy of Terror when I was about 13 and I'm still having night terrors from that. So
I totally relate to you, Lee, 100%. Ellen, what about you?
Well, like Lee, I was a voracious reader. I read everything when I was growing up. But a lot of my reading was horror. I mean, I read Lovecraft a lot early on, and Harlan Ellison, who's a lot of his work, I think, is horror. And I watched Twilight Zone, the original one, and Night Gallery, and One Step Beyond. All the old horror TV things. I've never been into horror movies that much. I mean, I go see some horror movies. I think in a way I relate to Lee, that watching them is a little more difficult for me for some of them than reading. But I've been reading everything for years, since I was a kid. I read fantasy. I guess I got more into horror when I was at Omni, and I was supposed to be editing science fiction or acquiring it, and I wanted to edit more, and I didn't want to conflict with what I was doing at Omni, so I started editing horror anthologies. So that's how I got into editing horror anthologies, although I've always enjoyed horror. Yeah.
And Andy?
Yeah, my parents were big readers growing up. They were both teachers, and Mom and Dad had a bookshelf full of contemporary writers, and one of the two writers that they loved the most were Kuntz and King. And I think I was 10 years old. My first memory of reading horror, I may have read it before then and not known what I was reading, but my first memory of reading horror is reading Watchers. It was my mother took it and said, "You should read this. You'll like this." And I did. I loved it. And then Dad, I remember him reading portions of it out loud to me when I was like, I want to say 12, maybe 10. I'm not sure. It was 85, so I was 7 then. So it could have been as early as 8 or 9. But I remember the feeling of that opening scene in that book of the clown and Georgie in the sewer and just how terrifying that was. So to me, like, those are my entry points. It's very like the most boring answer you can give. Yeah.
No.
The two writers who these days populate, I guess, or maybe more so King and Kuntz, populate the horror sections at Barnes and Noble were my entry point. So.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to Andy and Lee, like, so much. And to anyone who said that horror movies are scary, like, I don't watch horror movies hardly at all. I mean, I'll come out for an occasional one, but Hereditary, like, messed me up so bad I haven't really jumped into another one since. And I will say that my parents were big readers. Well, actually, my mother. My dad is now, but he wasn't then because he was busy working. But my mom was reading horror, and I would steal her books. But I was more interested in like Agatha Christie and John Bellairs and kind of the lighter side. But once I dipped into horror, it kind of ruined me for everything else. Like, I think I became like a junkie for that feeling. And it just never, I mean, there's been ebbs and flows. So I think like a huge horror renaissance for me was in 2018 when I discovered indie horror. And I have not looked back. Like, I haven't read a fantasy book or any other genre since 2018. Like, you guys ruined me. So nice. I love it. So let me just say that, you know, when we talk about Renaissance, it's kind of like this revival or resurgence. So a modern Renaissance is, you know, by definition, kind of suggesting that what I just said, that there's been ebbs and flows. And when we were talking about this the other day on Twitter, Ellen, you said that you had been talking about like the golden age of horror for quite some time. Like, can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, having done the best horror of the year for 13 years now, first of all, in the last few years, I'd say 5 years or so, there are many more female writers who are, I don't know, I mean, you know, I've been covering the field for a long time, and I do think there are many more female writers now. I'm not sure why that is, you know, but it's fact. There are many more writers from other countries other than North America. Now, first, I remember discovering the Australian writers. You know, I started working with them, Karen Warren, Terry Dowling, especially, a long time. He's been around a long time, and then in the last 5 years or so, writers from Singapore, writers from who are, you know, Priya Sharma, who's British Indian, Usman Malik from Pakistan. I mean, there are tons of new writers from different cultures, horror writers, and there are new horror writers from different countries in Africa, Nigeria. I'm not as familiar with them as I'd like to be, but to me, those new voices are bringing a whole new dimension to our field. And that's, as far as I can tell, my judgment is that it's been happening in the last 5 years or so. You know, and I think there's more and better. I mean, you know, I've been covering short fiction for a very long time, and I just find that there's more and better. There's also more and not so good, but you know, but there's more short fiction being published all the time. That's really terrific. You know, horror. So that's kind of, you know, I think it's coming from different cultures and also just, and from, you know, from, I'm always going to get a LGBTQ. I'm sorry, I, you know, but different, you know, queer fiction. So it's not just from different countries and different cultures, but different points of view. And I think it's great. And this has been happening the last several years. I'm not saying it didn't exist before, but I do think it's a huge, oops, I just hit my lamp, a huge influx. And I think that's terrific.
I saw a lot of nodding heads. So does anyone want to elaborate on that as well? Any shares for that?
Well, I'd like to ask a question of Ellen. Do you think that that's because, I mean, obviously there were women writing, but perhaps they weren't being seen. And do you think that's just a little bit more women in publishing, perhaps? Or what do you think is the cause of this sort of explosion of, you know, a more diverse group of writers?
About women, I'm not sure, but other countries, the internet. I mean, the fact that, okay, I really am not sure about the woman thing. That I haven't been able to kind of really figure it out. I do think my perception is that there are more women writing. But as far as the other thing, the other countries, the internet and email, you know, it used to be you had to send stories in physically and have an IRC. And remember internet? Oh, you don't know. You're too young, all of you. International reply coupon. You had go to the post office, buy them if you're in another country, send them with your manuscript, and then I, as the editor, had to go to the post office and cash them in for stamps. And that's a real pain in the neck for people who are from other countries, who other than the United States. So I think email, as far as foreign to me, writers, I think part of that explosion is because of email, because you can just email material now, and it's so much easier and faster, and it makes it accessible for people from outside the United States. But women, I don't know, someone else take that. I really don't know.
I wonder if it's because of readership, like we weren't allowed to read these subversive things before, like reading a novel used to be naughty, and now,
I don't know. I mean, is it that people, I don't know. I mean, is there more of an interest by maybe, I'm flummoxed. I mean, that is a really interesting discussion that I think I would love to know more opinions about what happened, why there seem to be more women in the field of horror in all positions, yes, as editors, publishers, and writers. I don't know, but I do. Well, I was going to say something. No, never mind. I was going to say sometimes women in publishing horror got slammed for things,
Yeah, I was going to kind of say that as well, because I know that I was invited to write reviews for both Cemetery Dance and Scream right around the same time, because they had focused on male voices talking about horror for such a long time. And they were both seeking to have a woman who reads it a lot. I remember when my editor at Scream messaged me, he messaged me on social media, and he was like, "Do you think you're ever going to get sick of reading horror? Is this like a kick for you? Or, are you going to be doing this for a long time?" And I said, "No, this is my thing. This is what I'm going to be doing." And then he invited me to write reviews for Scream, primarily because he was looking for a woman's perspective on horror. So,
I mean, I do a column for Cemetery Dance, but let's say 20 years ago, there were several women who were prominent in the field doing critical work. I mean, to me, The Year's Best is not critical, that kind of critical, but, and we got slammed by at least one male writer who was upset because we didn't like his work. And he wrote a really nasty thing in a small press about us, putting us down for being women, or because we didn't like his work. I mean, he couldn't separate the fact that we just didn't like his work, basically. And I do also remember, I don't know if I should bring this up, but Terry Winley and I got slammed for having too many women in one of our books. And the fact is we had more men than women in the book, but too many women was like a number of women, the number was too many because it seemed overwhelming, even though we were less than half. They were less than half. So yes, I mean, that's changed over time, but people still get slammed, men and women and queer people and all kinds, and other people from other cultures. The field, not only of horror, but all fields can have some really ugliness in them. And people who just are not happy, or who just want to slam things that they don't like, or they don't agree with, shall we say.
mm-hmm.
Or I shouldn't bring up the negative so early.
Well, I actually was going to just keep rolling with questions that for the horror renaissance topic, but there are actually some questions that I don't want to get lost over here in the side. So Zach Madness asks Eric, do you feel that having your books going out of print shortly after or right before publication has hampered your career at all?
That's a good question. I personally don't know. I'm hoping not. I mean, it's obviously such an honor to be on the preliminary ballot for the Stokers for a book that's technically, not in print anymore. I don't really. I'm hoping that my readership will stay with me, because we do have some really exciting plans for Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, with a big publisher that just hasn't been announced yet. So I think I don't know. I think like the way the internet works, I think like, you can maintain hype and you can maintain, a level of interest in things, even, and, publishing works so slow in general to begin with. So I hope that, my readers will stay with me and enjoy the journey, because it definitely it's a process, and, um, I just had to make the decision that was best for me at the time. Um, but yeah, that's kind of not like a non-answer, but it's
No, I think it's a good leaping off point into like the horror renaissance conversation, because we can talk about indie publishing and how I feel like that has really revolutionized certain aspects of the industry. Eric LaRocca's book in particular, I got to watch firsthand do some incredible things. First of all, his cover reveal on social media went viral in like a major way. It was this book here. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. I watched this cover reveal, like I'm getting chills actually. He posted that, and that reveal just went to the far reaches of social media so fast. And then Books in the Freezer, sorry, remind me of her name again. I just blanked on it.
Stephanie, I think, right?
Stephanie,
Yeah.
she posted that she had a did she say that she had like a hard time finishing it, or she said that she like it was super visceral for her or something.
Yeah.
She said something about how this book made her feel a certain way. She had a certain feeling about it on TikTok, and it went viral to the
It's
tune of
huge.
like
Yeah.
thousands of sales. This book, being an indie book from Weird Punk, just a small publisher, sold. I looked at Goodreads. Your reviews were like in the upwards of like 5,000.
Yeah, we're now at like almost 17,000 reviews.
That is insane. I have never in my life seen an indie book do something like that. And that, if that's not a resurgence or a revolution or some kind of thing, I have no idea what is. Like if anybody has any comments on indie publishing and what that's doing right now for the horror industry, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's the only place that mostly is doing collections. I mean, there are very few larger publishers, and that's been going on a long time. And so I think collections are coming out of the indie press are really important. I think, and also, as you said, the cover of your book, Eric, is fabulous, and I think that's an important thing. It used to be that indie art and production was pretty crappy. And that's changed over time. I mean, actual professional artists or people who know how to design books and covers have been getting into the indie production. And I think that's really important for an audience.
I wonder if it's just the ability of smaller presses and indie presses to be a little bit more fluid and quicker to react and to respond, and people want to read stories that they're in. They want to recognize themselves in a story. So, Eric's got, he's onto something. There is, people want to read that. So, I think that the beauty of indie publishing is that you can get those, they can take a chance on a voice. The bigger publishers, if you've got to publish, you've got to print X number of thousands of copies, that's a big risk. And so they want to walk on the safe side, right? From a business perspective, they need to publish what they know will sell. Whereas an indie publisher often can take a little chance. They might do print on demand. So, maybe not invest quite so much and put the money towards the marketing side. And so you got an opportunity to introduce new voices and different types of stories so that everyone gets a chance to see themselves in a book. And I think that's what we're looking for now. We're wanting to work through. I mean, horror is really good at working through and processing the things that frighten us, and so, or just escape. And I think that the people are looking for those, either an escape mechanism or some way of processing what we're going through, and putting themselves in the story. And so, Eric just hit on, just an incredible, an incredible formula. And I think lots of indie publishers are doing that. And with Ellen saying, it's in the indie space that people are doing fiction collections and anthologies, which are great for sampling. And, again, it's that low level of investment. You can buy one book and sample 20 fantastic authors. I think that's quite special. And I do find that I think that a lot of it, indie publishing has opened up, the way for a bit of a renaissance in terms of the breadth of what we're reading, for sure.
It occurs to me that a lot of this too, like Eric, is what happened with his book is proof that the readership is there, that it's always been there for other voices and voices that are not mainstream. So indie publishing is really grabbing onto that. And it's also what we talked about earlier with the internet, this idea that there's access now to people and images and books and things that maybe mainstream publishing had always been the gatekeeper about what was and was not available to read. So that's another case of, I guess, my wife and I have a game where we sort of play, internet good, internet bad, and this would fall into internet good column. So
I'm glad.
I love that. I love that because that's so true. I mean, social media is probably responsible for the way the landscape of how a book is marketed happens. Like when I get an advanced reading copy, usually on the back, it kind of details the campaign really for the book. And it will have like various different labels, genre labels. And one of them is LGBTQ, which is amazing. Like, I don't think that was, the queer horror is not a genre. It's a representation. And there's a question here. Let's see, C.S. Humble asked, are there any particular voices of queer fiction, other voices who have launched this new golden age that we could call out and recommend? And I think there are. And I think that
I have a list.
Yeah,
I have a list ready.
Go for it. That would be really important.
Obviously, like number one on that list would be Haley Piper. I think like Unfortunate Elements of My Anatomy. It's such a wonderful, wonderful collection of short stories. Also Queen of Teeth. I haven't read it yet. I have a beautiful hardcover special edition of it that I'm so excited to like break into. Joe Koch is another really awesome transgressive fiction writer. They wrote The Wingspan of Severed Hands, which is another weird punk novella that's just like so trippy and just weird, and it'll blow your mind. And I also read an advanced copy of their upcoming fiction collection called Convulsive, which Laird Barron, I believe, like tweeted about a couple weeks ago, just how amazing it is. I got to write the introduction for that, which was such an honor. And then my last recommendation would probably be David Demchuk, who wrote Red X, which is such a fabulous, just amazing book. It's also on the preliminary ballot for the Stokers, and it really is one of the best novels I've ever read. But I think we really are in like a golden age of queer horror fiction with so many voices just adding to the inferno of queer representation in the genre. And it's just so exciting to be a part of this and be a part of this movement. And it's indie right now. It's a little bit underground because it's subversive, but I have this feeling that it's going to eventually break into like bigger publishing houses. And I feel like, even Gretchen Felker Martin with Manhunt that's coming out through Tor Nightfire. I also read that book recently and blurbed it. And she's just absolutely incredible. I really feel like we are entering an age where queer horror fiction is like on shelves in bookstores, and it's not something you have to really like go out of your way to search for.
Does anyone else have any other comments about that? I mean, I've especially noticed it in YA fiction too.
Well,
Totally.
I would give a shout out to, of all things, like my local Barnes and Noble. I teach classes as well, and I had a student in one of my creative writing classes who got a job there, and over the course of the summer, overhauled their entire section. And she herself is gay, and so there is this amazing variety and diversity of voices in that section of the Barnes and Noble in Macon, Georgia. So I think, like, Eric, that's where we got your book. In fact, my wife and I were there, and she was like, "Look at this! I love this book," and she was talking about yours, and that's how I found out about it for the first time. So,
wow, thank you.
So yeah, I mean, so it's happening out in the world, in the real world, and it's translating into bookshelves and stores.
I mean, just speaking about the Barnes and Noble horror section, like we've always been complaining about how there was never a section and now there is. And I think that's due largely in part to the fact that, like, where else are they going to put it? It's like, it's so much, you know, like at this point you have like Stephen Graham Jones and Josh Mallerman and Paul Tremblay and, like, you know, Alma Katsu, like these books are just coming out all the time. And it's like, are you just going to keep shelving that in general fiction? Like where are you going to have room for 20 copies of The Only Good Indian? You know, it's like they finally realized, like, we need a dedicated space, and it can't just be the King and Kuntz section. You know, it has to be involving these like broader selections. I mean, Grady Hendrix has a huge selection. Quirk Books has, you know, like books coming out every month. Like they have to make room for it, right? Well,
I think what you said earlier, though, about, you know, it's really a young cohort coming through too, isn't it? And I read for the Bram Stokers a couple of years ago in the YA jury, and just about everything, and it's anything goes in YA, right? You know, it seems to me that that's a really experimental phase, and young people are really soaking the stuff up. And I you know, particularly in sort of transgender issues and those kinds of things were very prevalent in the last few years in those sections of, you know, I really recommend hitting all of the awards, the Spatterpunk and the Stokers, and for places to discover people, you know. There's some great, you know, if you haven't read, if you see a name come up and you haven't yet read it, that's a great place to discover them. And the long lists, because there's plenty of them, you know, the breadth is fantastic. But definitely, to me, I think the young adult space is a place where, you know, I mean, you know, horror is already subversive, you know, it's already a little bit off center, and the kids love that. And so I always think that they're sort of one step ahead of us on what's coming and what's big. And so if you have a look at the sort of YA list, you really see what the trends are, and they very strongly you know, looking for representation and looking to recognize themselves in stories.
There's a great talking point here by Catherine McCarthy, referring to what Ellen said about there being more women horror writers. From my own perspective, broadening the umbrella of what constitutes horror has really helped. And I love that comment, because I find that that's true too. I mean, you have a lot of readers who still think, well, it didn't scare me, so it's not horror. But I think the conversation is broadening. What do you think, Christina?
I think that looking back 20 years ago, there weren't as many women writers. Ellen, you're right there, I think, in terms of visibility. And I think the internet has a lot to do with it. Even me, when I was submitting back, okay, let's not count the years, back then, I did use IRCs. I did go to the post office to buy them for $2.50 each and put them with my typed envelopes, typed stories and poems, and send them out. And, you know, waited a few weeks or months for replies. So it's changed a lot since then, and I think it's also in terms of the time scale, where we can send and receive our submissions,
Mhm.
and being so far from everywhere else, Singapore, it felt very I won't say isolating, but it just felt like I was kind of far away and not quite a part of everything else. And yet with forums like the Rumor Mill back then, we would post our submissions, rejections, and everything, and it was a bit of a community there, and I really felt like I belonged there. So and I did notice that since then, internationally, we've really opened out globally, and I think Me Too really gave women a voice, and more of us are willing to talk about a lot of, the things that have affected us, or the things that we see. And one of the key points is heritage, which, Lee and I and Jean and Angela tapped. And with Asian societies, we're usually very reticent about all these stories, but it felt like the right time to tell them, I guess, as difficult as they were. So yes, and with tech trains, and so I think that it's also us women coming out to write more about our stories, writing stories about the people we know, the lives that they've led as well, and yeah, I feel a change, like since from 20 years ago, that the stories we told were very different then. I mean, mine was sanitized. They were written for an international audience, whereas for the first time in Tortured Willows, I've actually written something about my heritage and my country's history. So that's something very different, I guess. That there is an openness and an acceptance to such stories, and I think the reception was very encouraging. And I think with every bit of encouragement, more women will come out and tell the stories that are inside them. So yeah, I know it's not just us. It's women from other countries as well, who are probably a lot more reticent about writing and talking about their very their stories from there. Whereas everything else we've read, I grew up reading Enid Blyton, and I thought, perfect childhood was running around the countryside solving mysteries with my friends, with my little dog. Yeah, and when I was growing up as a teenager, I read American stories. Dean Koontz was one of my favorites, and it was pretty much all whatever we could get from the the bookshelves, because there was no Amazon or there's no internet then. I think I'm revealing my age here, but never mind. And so yeah, and we had secondhand bookshops who had very different distributors. So the more indie books I got were from there, whereas at the more conventional books we had King. If we were lucky, we had one or two Koontz. We had John Saul, and I think that was it. I discovered Clive Barker in the secondhand store, and I loved him, and his stories were just so mind blowing. Pi was one of my favorite characters. So it's all these little places that we get our stories from, and and eventually at some point we will tell our stories as well. So that's just a perspective from this girl from an island somewhere in the tropics. And
I love that, Christina.
yeah.
I've noticed too that publishers are just being like more intentional about making sure that they're including people. I know now that like Ellen, would you agree that like when publishers are putting together anthologies or an editor, to make sure that there's a lot of diversity? It's not just like, it's pretty taboo to release a collection with all a bunch of white guys, right?
Yes, but it still happens.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yes, but I think people are more mindful of it, and I think that's really good news. Yeah, I think I'd say most publishers and editors are trying to diversify their tables of content if possible.
Mm-hmm. And with access to just so many voices. Oh, I'm sorry, Lee. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to go back to Catherine's comment about broadening the perspective, what we call horror, and it is, we obviously, we can go all the way to from, unease to all the way to body horror, for example. And I think Christina made a good point about, there being more women, and we're talking about women's stories and the things that frighten us and the things that affect women. But also, I think if you think of geography and, I live on the Shaky Isles. We just felt that massive eruption in New Zealand from 2,400 kilometers away in Tonga, and for us, tsunami and eruptions, and they're a big part of our everyday life. I think there are something like 100 every day in New Zealand. So for us, that's a sort of simmering tension. So what frightens you depends on where you come from and how you've lived. The fact that there's this big resurgence, this new wave of LGBTQ horror is because that fear has been sort of sitting there quietly. It's not like it hasn't been there, but it's simmering away, and it's concerning. And now we have a place for it. We have a voice for it. The indie world has opened these opportunities. So I think, yes, Catherine is dead right. We need to broaden what we consider horror, and so it isn't just North American horror. It isn't just Gothic horror. There are so many other cultures and lifestyles and geographies and types of things that frighten people that we are just now discovering. Indigenous concerns, horrors that haven't been spoken about. And Christina said taboo, and I think that is a really important word, because horror has been taboo, and because we're in this really exciting space where, because it's horror, we can write it. We can write it. That's so freeing, isn't it? That we're the people who can write that. It's not out of bounds. And Ellen just saying how exciting it was. How the body horror anthology was accepted, and you would not have been able to write that 20 or 30 years ago, and certainly not with women in it, women writers. And so we're open to that. I just think it's very freeing when we actually broaden our perspective of what is horror, because what frightens people is different. It's different depending on, where you live. I mean, honestly, if you're a battered woman, for example, home is the most frightening place, and so I just think that the scope is so huge, and that is why I think there's a resurgence, because we're aware now. There are things that we actually can come out and say.
Yeah, and there's also to be a little more simplistic when you talk about what's considered horror and what isn't. I mean, there's some people who, for years, would say psychological horror, terror fiction is not horror. So that means Psycho's not horror. That means The Silence of the Lambs isn't horror. And so, some people have had their blinkers on, and they won't accept, and sometimes, and also not all ghost stories are horror. Some ghost stories are very moving and are not horror at all. It depends on the tone. So a lot of, as I said, this is much more simplistic than what you're saying, but just saying, well, this is horror and this isn't, it depends on your reaction, on the reader's reaction to it, I think.
I think too, over the years, mainstream horror has been very, looking at the big five publishers ever since Silence of the Lambs, which was 1990, somewhere in there. like one of the reasons we started seeing the decrease in horror in the mainstream is that publishers started calling it something else, you know, psychological suspense or supernatural thrillers even. And that's persisted until very recently, even among certain publishers. I think Tor Nightfire is doing a lot to sort of shape the landscape right now in terms of horror in the mainstream. But even like, I know my publisher, when The Boatman's Daughter came out, they were very hesitant to call it horror because they wanted it to reach a wider audience. But now, 2 years later, as the copy for my next book gets written, the word horror is right there in big letters at the top. So there's a shift, but mainstream horror is independent publishers are more nimble than the big Titanics that have to turn slowly. Yeah.
Do you guys think that fiction follows film or film follows fiction? I mean, they tend to go together since you know, a lot of movies are based off of the books. And so do you think that the popularity of horror in film has changed? I mean, I know that like, you know, in some cultures the horror films are way more applauded than other genres of film, but here, don't you think that I don't know, with different indie again making bigger waves at the box office influences what we can do publishing wise?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think once you start talking about film, it overwhelms text. So there's always that danger that I think a lot of when I guess splatter horror. I mean, there was you know, what is it called? Torture porn, you know, that kind of
Like
stuff.
extreme.
That might have had a negative influence on text. I'm not sure. Or people were, I think when that got really hot with Eli Roth and his work, it made everyone think it made people who are not into horror think that's what horror is. And I think that was kind of negative for the field because that's not what horror has to be. And I think you say horror to someone and they freak out. It's like, oh no, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to read that because it's like that. Yes. So sometimes it's negative. I mean, it's a loop, a feedback loop.
I've just noticed like on Netflix though, I mean, a lot of the most popular shows are horror.
It
just seems so much more accessible and so much more digestible, and people are just like into it more.
Again, they're more nimble. The TV studios, I think, are more nimble than the movie studios. I don't know if they cost less to make or not, but definitely there's on television or what we call or video, whatever. Things move faster than in making movies, and
I think too, horror has always been in film successful. Like no matter what form it takes, whether it's, you know, something like Paranormal Activity, like found footage movies, or that are really cheap to produce, or whether it's The Shining, you know, I think financially horror is a good bankable thing in the film industry. And, you know, it's often said that's because it's like pretty low budget. It's easy to make, one location. You can build a pretty cheap script around a movie around a horror script. You know, but books, I don't know if I would say books always go deeper, but books definitely are more of a interactive experience. Maybe it might not be the right word, but they, you know, you can be shown images and react to them in a film, but then with a book, you have to create the images in your head, as you read the words on the page. And so there's more of a participation there, maybe, rather than just a reaction. And so I think with books, it's always going to be a trickier genre to be successful. Because of that, maybe because of the ick factor, I guess, you know, for lack of a better term. I don't know. But
I do want to emphasize our host, David, says, I think a huge piece of the puzzle for authors and even publishers are reviewers, bloggers, book talk, bookstagram, shouting from the rooftops about books and having those shouts become threads to reach new readers is massive. Plus, having authors on social media and interacting with readers is a big bonus. Which again, social media has been like a huge contributor to the popularity of the genre. I know that when I first started on Bookstagram, I kind of was just being well-rounded. Like my username was Sadie reads them all, and I did. I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi and just like all this stuff. But then I started noticing that there was this other universe of people who were just talking about horror, and that seemed to be my tribe. So I think like tribal genres on social media is largely influential. Like if I see somebody post a book, I want it and I want it now. It's very viral. What do you guys think about social media? Like, do you utilize social media for your for kind of like helping build your audience, or do you think that it's not really necessary?
I don't know if it's necessary, but it's useful. You know, some
Right.
people aren't comfortable with it, and I wouldn't want them to force themselves to do it because they'll be miserable.
I think for people like Christina and I who are way out, you know, in little islands in the middle of, you know, the ocean, a long way away from where a lot of our readers are, you know, without social media, we just wouldn't be visible. So we're very lucky to be able, I mean, just being able to do something like this and have and be visible is huge, you know. So I think that's really opened up a lot of opportunities for us. In fact, we were saying, I was on a panel with some Australians yesterday, and we were just saying, you know, that has kind of leveled the playing field for us over this pandemic. You know, we've always been stuck out in the middle of the ocean.
Yep.
And nobody's seen us. And now everybody's kind of stuck home in their living rooms, you know, so we're all a bit isolated. And so the pandemic has kind of, you know, just made social media so much more important. And you know, we can put this up on YouTube an hour from now, and anyone who, you know, wasn't awake can still watch it, you know. And so the time aspect is important too. You know, we can't do a book launch, you know, at the same time as you're having the book launch, and you know, we can't get to America. Every time I come to America, it costs me several $1,000s, you know. So it's you know, it's a big investment. But whereas getting on social media is a really quick thing to do and very distracting and takes up way too much time. But I'm one of these. I'm terrible. I'm only on Facebook because I'm old. Well, I'm actually on Twitter and everything, but I just can't operate Twitter, and I'm really hopeless at operating Instagram. And so, you know, I find that do one thing well as opposed to 20 things badly. So definitely won't be seeing me on TikTok because, you know, I can't sing and dance.
It's horrible. We are at our 1 hour mark, so I did want to make sure that I know we could talk about this for a long time. I did want to make sure that we gave plenty of opportunity for you guys to share what you're currently working on, and to promote anything that you want everybody over here chatting on the side to, and who will watch later, to know about what you're doing currently. So we'll go ahead and go in the reverse order this time. Ellen, is there anything that you want to share, what you're working on, what you're proud of, what's going on in your life?
Sure. I'm working on, well, right now I'm handed in Screams from the Dark, with 29, you might know the title, one of me, 29 Tales of Monsters and the Monstrous, I think it's called.
Yay!
On Tour Nightfire, and that's going to be a big horror anthology on about monsters and the monstrous, and it's coming out from Tour Nightfire June 7th, I believe. I don't have the cover. I have an arc, but it doesn't have the cover. You can Google the cover. It's really cool. I have several novellas that I edited for Tour.com, including this one. Sadie knows this. That's terrific. It's coming out, I think, in April. It's by Malcolm Devlin, and it's I guess you'd call it, I don't know, science fiction horror. I mean, it's about misinformation, zombies or not zombies, and it's terrific. It's a novella, and then I
Yeah, I
love,
just got that. The cover's great.
yeah, it's really cool. It's Samuel Araya, who I love his work. And I've got three other novellas coming out from Tor. I won't talk about the science fiction and fantasy ones, but I've got another horror one coming out from Mary Rickert in this September called Lucky Girl and a Krampus Story, How I Became a Horror Writer. And it's a Krampus story, so
Krampus, yeah.
yeah, it's pretty horrific. It's horrific. When I get an arc of that, Sadie, you'll get that.
Yay, thank you.
And then, of course, the year's best, as always. I'm working on number 14 right now, and hopefully I'll be finished I have to hand it in like March 1st. So, and then that's it. I think that's it.
That's a lot.
Well, and I'm about to sell an anthology that I can't talk about. Someone asked about body shocks. There was a question there. Someone had mentioned if I felt that body shocks had brought me a new audience or something like that.
Oh yeah, I saw that too. It was something about you mentioning about it winning
not being
nominated.
Splatterpunk Award.
Yes.
Well, I remember it was more or less, do I feel that it broadened my audience? No.
Yeah, that's exactly what he asked. Yeah.
I mean, for that book, it's not my usual thing. I think what the good thing about it, and that some reviewers have said, how come we moved around? But anyway, we just.
Sorry, I accidentally, I was going to press chat, then I pressed.
Oh, it's okay.
By accident.
I'm glad you got right back in,
But it has
Christina.
been, it's brought together a bunch of writers who are not known for writing splatterpunk. Some have been and some haven't been known. And so I think people who read splatterpunk and love it and body horror will have been aware of my anthology and will pick out those writers but the thing is, those writers don't always write that kind of work, body horror. So they may be disappointed in the future if they pick out the writers, and say, oh, I'm going to read this person because she's in that book. And it's like, oh, but that's not body horror. So I don't know. I mean, that book has got a broader audience. If it will bring a broader audience to the writers in the book or to me, I don't know. I doubt it.
Thanks, Ellen. Looking forward to all of your stuff. Eric, what about you? What are you working on right now?
So currently I'm working on a novel that I'm hopefully going to sell with my agent. And other than that, I have a novella coming out with Journal Stone called We Can Never Leave This Place. We revealed the cover art the other day. So you can go check that out on my Twitter. And then I also have really exciting news that I can't reveal just yet. But things have gotten worse since we last spoke. Is going to be published in a big collection through a major publisher in September. That's all I can say, really. But definitely keep an eye out for that, and I'm really excited about it.
I will say that I copy and paste your pinned tweet where you talk about that, on Reddit, multiple times a day, because people go, where can I get there? And then I just tell them. So
yeah.
Keep that there.
I get a lot of emails and a lot of DMs. But yeah.
Christina, what are you working on?
That's a very good question. Okay, I've had a novel I've been working on for about 10 years. I kind of put it aside, threw it out, and I think I've finally put it in Scrivener, and I'm slowly working on it, but that's the structure. I know the ending, and it's probably going to be a 3-parter, and it spans quite a long time, so it's probably going to take me just as long to write it. So that's the big project that will take a while. I plan to start compiling my third a collection of poetry collection pretty soon. I don't know if I have enough poems to put it together, but this one will be a themed collection. Actually, they're all themed. But yeah, so that should be completed by this year, I hope, and then I'll send it to my publisher and see when that's going to happen. I also plan to work on a bit more fiction this year, which hopefully will tie in with the novel, because I always feel that my fiction is still very new and raw, and I can always improve on it. So I'm going to work on that this year.
Thank you. We're looking forward to all of that. Andy, what do you want to promote? We heard about your new novel, so.
Yeah, it's called The Hollow Kind. It's coming out in October from MCD. That's done, so I don't have. I mean, it's just finished copy edit. So right now, I've been enjoying this kind of spring of my post MFA many years ago writing career, actually returning to writing short stories again, because the joy was destroyed in the writing program for writing short stories. So it's coming back, and I'm enjoying it. So I've been working on some stories, and I've got one coming out in Doug Morano's new Bad Ham Books collection, which I think Christina, you're in there as well, right? Are you in that one? Okay, Lee is. Yes, I knew someone here was. And so, yeah, so that's really it right now. I mean, just sort of the run up to the next book. I'm kind of waiting to see what that's going to be like.
So excited for that. And Lee, what about you? What are you working on?
What am I working on? Right now, I'm actually working on a film project. Obviously, you know, with film, you can't say anything until you can say something. So I really probably shouldn't say anything about that, but it's very exciting. And I'm working on a collection of essays, memoir essays called Unquiet Spirits, which will come out from Black Spot Books in 2023. So the way publishing works, we're getting on and doing that now. So that's quite some time away. I've got a collection coming out with Silver Shamrock at the end of the year, I think, and a novella with Crystal Lake Publishing in their new Dark Tide series, novella series. So I've got one coming in a collection of war stories with Angela Eureka Smith and Maxwell Gold. Probably lots of other things, but I'm quite a slow writer. You know, I don't write more than 300 or 400 words a day. So I'm honestly, I'm one of these people that sort of have eyes bigger than my stomach, really, and want to do all the projects and don't have any time. I know I've got in another couple of weeks, I'm convening the mentor program for the New Zealand Society of Authors, so I'm expecting sort of 1,000 manuscripts to come across, and it's kind of exciting. Ellen will agree with this. It's really exciting to get new manuscripts across, and it's also tedious because some of them are horrible, but mostly they're good. But it's really exciting to have play a part in shaping new writers and new careers. And so I always look forward to that and sort of getting a sneak peek at what's coming from in New Zealand literature. And that's, of course, across the board. It's not just horror. So, I'm supposed to be finishing a poetry collection, and I won a residency for that last year. That kind of sort of didn't happen because of COVID. So I really need to get that finished and out. So I suspect that will be it's the first draft's done. So that will probably be towards the end of the year.
So many exciting things. I love
it. Sadie, what are you up to?
So I am editing with Ashley, the co-owners. We're co-owners of Nightworms. We're editing an anthology about human monsters. So the submission call for that we announced, and then it actually officially opens on February 15th. So I have seen a lot of authors saying that they're working on something, which makes me really excited. I can't wait to start reading stories for that. And I also am in tandem working on a novella series called My Dark Library with Cemetery Gates. And I'm looking for novellas from fresh voices in the industry. And I really, I kind of view horror as almost like I get to go inside of an unexplored area and start digging around for something very exciting, like a little gem or a treasure. So I'm really looking forward to reading some stories from maybe people who have been too scared to submit before, or like authors who are trying to get outside their brand. Like I keep running into authors who feel trapped in their genre. Like maybe they write splatterpunk and their audience just really wants more of that, but they kind of want to get into more like literary horror. So I'm just looking for people who want to tell a new story, and I want to give it a platform. So there's going to be like 6 to 8 novellas coming out through Cemetery Gates that I get to pick, and I'm over the moon about it. I'm really excited. So that's what I'm working on. Well, you know what? It was so nice to spend this morning with all of you and see your smiling faces and hear from you about the industry that we get so excited about and spend time in together. I really just love spending time with you guys today.
It has been fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you. It was an honor.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and
and
thank
you,
you to
Sadie.
everyone who came
Our
in the
host.
audience. It's lovely to see some friends' names in there
Yes, I
too.
love that. It was so much fun. Yeah. And thank you so much, David from FanFi Addict, the TBRCon. Thank you for having us here today.